the dust-choked territories of 1880s Montana, a challenge echoed across the plains, a whisper that became a roar. It wasn't a call for the fastest gun or the richest cattle baron, but for something far rarer, a true cowboy. Serena Dubois, a widow with eyes as hard as prairie diamonds, and a ranch the size of a small kingdom, made a proclamation that would test the soul of every man who heard it. Her late husband, Stallion, a midnight black devil named Tamed, was unrideable. 25 men, a collection of the toughest, proudest riders in the West, had tried to tame him. And 25 men had been thrown, broken, and humbled. This is the story of that 26th man, and how the truest test of a cowboy has nothing to do with breaking a horse, but everything to do with understanding a heart. The dust of Jacques Dubois' funeral had barely settled back onto the plains of Redemption Valley when the rumors began. They swirled around the town of Redemption Creek like an autumn whirlwind passed between cracked lips in the smoky confines of the Silver Spur Saloon and whispered over gingham curtains in the general store. Serena Dubois, the newly widowed mistress of the sprawling L'Étoile Solitaire ranch, had gone mad with grief. But Serena was not mad. She was cornered. Her husband, a French-Canadian trapper, turned cattleman with a spirit as vast as the Montana sky, hadn't just left her a massive tract of land. He'd left her a legacy encapsulated in 10,000 acres of prime grazing land, a herd of 5,000 longhorns, and one magnificent, impossible creature, Tempet. The stallion was Jacques' masterpiece, a jet-black Andalusian cross with a fire in his eyes that mirrored the lightning of a summer storm. Tempet was more than a horse. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of the wild, untamable spirit of the West. Jacques had raised him from a foal, and the bond between them was the stuff of local legend. Man and beast moved as one, a partnership built on mutual respect, not domination. But with Jacques gone, felled by a sudden fever that had swept through the valley, Tempet's heart had broken. His grief manifested as a furious, violent rejection of any man who dared approach him. He was no longer just a horse. He was a guardian of a memory, a four-legged spectre of a love that was lost. Serena knew this. She also knew that Bartholomew Bart Corrigan, a man whose ambition was as vast and ugly as the strip-mined hills he owned to the east, was circling her ranch like a vulture. Corrigan had made no secret of his desire for L'Étoile Solitaire, its rich grasslands, and more importantly, its sole ownership of the vital aquifer that fed the entire valley, made it the jewel of the territory. While Jacques was alive, Corrigan's offers were a sour joke. With Jacques gone, they became thinly veiled threats. A woman alone can't run a spread this size. Serena, Corrigan had said to her just a week after the funeral, his voice a greasy blend of false sympathy and predatory hunger. Sell to me. I'll give you a fair price. You can move back east, live like a lady. Serena's reply had been as cold and sharp as a winter wind. The only way you'll get this land, Mr. Corrigan, is to pry it from my cold, dead hands, and I assure you they will be holding a loaded shotgun. But bravado was not a strategy. She needed a partner, a foreman, a husband, a man with the grit and integrity to stand not only against Corrigan, but with her. The problem was, she didn't trust the motives of any man who came calling now. They would see a wealthy widow, a prize to be won, a ranch to be controlled. They would not see her, and so the proclamation was born. It was a desperate, brilliant gamble, conceived one lonely night as she stood by the corral fence watching Tempate pace under the moonlight, a whirlwind of black fury and sorrow. The challenge was her shield and her sword. She rode into Redemption Creek herself, posting the notice on the sheriff's board. It was handwritten in her elegant, firm script, the words stark and unwavering to the men of Montana Territory. I, Serena Dubois, owner of the L'Étoile Solitaire Ranch, seek a partner in life and labor. My ranch requires a man of unparalleled skill and character. The test is simple. The test is my late husband's Stallion Tempête. He has not been ridden since the passing of his master. Any man who can saddle, mount, and ride Tempête with respect for a count of 10 heartbeats without breaking his spirit will earn my hand in marriage and a full partnership in this ranch. Attempts will be held every Saturday, starting at dawn. Let any man who believes himself a true cowboy present himself. The town buzzed. It was scandalous. It was insane. A woman offering herself and a fortune as a prize in a rodeo. But to the cowboys, drifters, and ranch hands, from 100 miles in every direction, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. They didn't see the nuance in her words, the call for respect, the warning against breaking his spirit. They saw only the challenge and the prize. They saw a wild horse to be conquered and a rich widow to be claimed. The first Saturday arrived with a blood-red dawn. A dozen men were waiting. Serena stood on the porch of her ranch house, dressed not in a widow's black, but in practical buckskin trousers and a simple cotton blouse, her auburn hair tied back. Her loyal ranch hand, an old, grizzled man named Samuel Pickett, who had been Jacques' best friend, stood beside her, his face a mask of worried disapproval. "This is folly, Cat," he grumbled, cleaning a pipe he had no intention of lighting. "You're inviting wolves to the door." "I'm separating the wolves from the sheepdogs." "Sam," she replied, her gaze fixed on the hopefuls. "Tempête will know the difference." The first man was a braggart named Cactus. Jack Riley, a rodeo champion from Cheyenne. He swaggered into the corral whip in hand. "Ain't a horse I can't break," he bellowed. Tempête met his arrogance with pure, unadulterated violence. The moment Jack's whip cracked the air, the stallion charged. It wasn't a bucking fit, it was a tactical assault. Tempête used his weight, his speed, and his terrifying intelligence, herding Jack against the rails before spinning on a dime and launching a kick that sent the man flying through the air. Jack landed in a heap, his arm broken, and his pride shattered. The second man, a giant of a fellow from up north, tried to use brute strength to force a saddle on the horse. Tempête simply bit him a swift, brutal snap that tore through his leather vest and sent him screaming from the corral. One by one they tried. One by one they failed. By midday, 4 men were nursing injuries, and the rest had quietly ridden away, their bravado gone. As the sun set, Serena stood alone by the corral. The challenge had been met, and the legend of the demon horse of L'Étoile Solitaire had begun. But her heart was heavy. She had proven her point, but she was no closer to finding the man she needed. She was still alone with the wolves gathering at her door. The weeks that followed turned Serena's bold proclamation into a grim spectacle. The story of the unrideable stallion and the widow's prize spread like wildfire carried by telegraph wires and trail-weary travelers. It became a challenge to the manhood of the entire territory. Each Saturday brought a new cast of characters to L'Étoile Solitaire, each man more certain than the last that he possessed the secret to taming the beast. The count of failures climbed steadily. 5, 10, 15. They came from all walks of life. There was Billy the Bull Rourke, a man built like a brick outhouse who believed he could tire the stallion out. He spent an hour chasing Tempête around the large corral, the horse seemingly toying with him, staying just out of reach until Billy was a wheezing, sweat-soaked mess. Then, with a flick of his heels, Tempête sent a spray of dirt into the man's face and trotted to the far side of the corral, looking as fresh as he had at dawn. Billy left without a word, his reputation as an unbreakable man in tatters. Then came a smooth-talking gambler from Denver, a man named Sterling Jones. He didn't use force. He brought a bucket of oats laced with whiskey, believing he could intoxicate the animal into submission. Tempet sniffed the offering, pinned his ears back, and kicked the bucket so hard it sailed over the fence and nearly decapitated one of Corrigan's spies, who was as always watching from a distant ridge. 20 men had now failed. The affair was becoming a grim joke in Redemption Creek. Bart Corrigan was a regular spectator, sitting atop his fine bay gelding on a rise overlooking the ranch, a smug smile playing on his lips. Each failure was a victory for him, proof that Serena's plan was a fool's errand and that she would eventually have to break. He began to apply more pressure. One of her line shacks was burned to the ground, arson, though Sheriff Brody claimed there was no proof. A section of her fence was cut, allowing 100 head of cattle to wander off, costing Sam and his few loyal hands 3 days of hard riding to recover them. Serena felt the noose tightening. The hopefuls who arrived now were of a different, more desperate sort. They weren't just arrogant. Some were cruel. Man number 23 was a drifter named Flint, a man with cold, dead eyes and a reputation for harshness. Serena felt a chill the moment she saw him. He didn't swagger. He slithered. She recognized him as one of Corrigan's men. He entered the corral with a weighted rope and a pair of cruel-looking spurs strapped to his boots. "He ain't a spirit," Flint snarled, his eyes on Tempate. "He's meat and bone can be broken." What happened next was seared into Serena's memory. Flint was fast and vicious. He managed to rope Tempate, and for a terrifying moment it looked like his brutal methods might work. He choked the stallion down, trying to suffocate the fight out of him. A wave of nausea washed over Serena. This was not what she wanted. This was torture. "Stop!" she cried out, starting toward the fence. "The challenge is over. Get out!" But before she could intervene, Tempate, with a surge of primal power that seemed to come from the very earth, found his footing. He didn't just buck. He rose on his hind legs, a terrifying black silhouette against the sky, and with a scream that was half rage and half pain, he snapped the thick rope. He charged Flint not to scare him, but to end him. Only Sam Pickett's quick thinking, firing his pistol into the air to startle the horse for a split second, gave Flint the chance to scramble under the fence, his face a mask of pure terror. The incident shook Serena to her core. She had almost caused the death of a man, a vile man, but a man nonetheless, and had subjected her beloved horse to unspeakable cruelty. That night, she seriously considered giving up. Maybe Corrigan was right. Maybe it was too much for her. The next Saturday, only 2 men showed up. The story of Flint's near-death experience had culled the herd. Man number 24 was a young, foolish boy who was thrown in less than 5 seconds. Man number 25 was a grizzled old timer who took one look at the fury in Tempate's eyes, tipped his hat, and said, "Ma'am, some things are best left between a horse and God." He turned and left without ever setting foot in the corral. 25 men, 25 failures. The well of hope had run dry. The next Saturday was a week away, but Serena knew no one else would come. The contest was over. She had lost. Corrigan would come calling soon, and this time his offer would be an ultimatum. As dusk fell over the empty ranch, Serena Dubois allowed herself a moment of despair, the silence of the valley pressing in on her as vast and unforgiving as her solitude. Silas Kane had watched the whole circus from a distance. His small, hard-scrabble ranch bordered the western edge of l'Étoile Solitaire. It was a place of stark, honest poverty, 160 acres of rocky soil and thirsty grass, that he worked with a relentless, quiet determination. His cabin was little more than a one-room shack, his fences were perpetually in need of mending, and his herd consisted of 24 bony cattle and one aging loyal mare named Dust Devil. Silas was a man carved from the silence of the plains. He was tall and lean, with a face weathered by sun and sorrow. His eyes, a pale, clear blue, held a watchfulness that missed nothing. He rarely went into Redemption Creek, and when he did, he spoke little, bought his meager supplies, and left. The townsfolk knew him as the lonely rancher, a man nursing some old, deep wound. They were right. Years ago in Texas, a cattle plague had wiped out his family's thriving ranch, and then a fire had claimed his wife and infant son. Silas had drifted north, carrying a grief so profound it had scoured all the noise and bravado out of him, leaving only a core of resilient decency. He wasn't interested in the widow's prize. The boisterous claims and public failures held no appeal. But he was interested in the horse. From his western ridge he could see the Dubois corral. He had spent hours watching Tempate. He didn't see a demon or a monster. He saw what Serena saw, a magnificent creature consumed by grief. The horse's violence wasn't malice. It was a desperate, lonely protest against a world that had stolen his master. Silas, a man who knew that particular brand of sorrow, all too well understood. He watched the braggarts and the bullies, the fools and the cruel men, and he saw the fundamental mistake they all made. They walked into that corral to take something, to conquer the horse, to win the ranch, to claim the widow. They were all trying to fill a space in their own lives. Not one of them had tried to understand the space that had been emptied in the horses. After the horrifying incident with Flint, Silas made a decision. He wasn't a suitor. He had no right to claim a prize. But he was a horseman, and he couldn't stand by and watch a noble animal be tormented, or a strong woman be backed into a corner by a man like Corrigan. The morning after the 25th man had walked away, Silas rode not to the main house of l'Étoile Solitaire, but to the fence line he shared with the Dubois ranch. He spent the day mending a section of his own fence, working slowly, methodically. But his eyes were on the distant corral where Tempate paced. He didn't approach. He just let his presence be known, a quiet figure on the horizon. The next day he did the same. And the next. Serena noticed him. From her porch she saw the lone figure on the ridge, a man working with a quiet economy of motion that spoke of deep competence. He wasn't a spy for Corrigan. He was on his own land. He never stared, never made any move toward her property, but she was aware of him. Sam noticed him too. "That's Silas Kane," Sam said, squinting into the sun. "Keeps to himself. Lost everything down in Texas, they say. Hard worker, but the land's got no heart over there." On the 4th day, Silas saw Serena ride out to check her northern pastures. He waited until she was on her way back, her path taking her near their shared fence line. He mounted Dust Devil and rode slowly to meet her, stopping on his side of the wire. Serena reined in her mare, her hand instinctively resting near the pistol on her hip. Her face was wary, etched with the strain of the past weeks. Silas removed his worn hat, holding it in his hands. His hair was the color of sun-bleached flax, and his gaze was direct yet respectful. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble that the wind almost stole. "Name's Silas Kane. I'm your neighbor to the west." "I know who you are, Mr. Kane," Serena replied coolly. The next Saturday was only 2 days away. She suspected he was just another hopeful, trying a different approach. "I'm not here about your proclamation, Mrs. Dubois," he said, as if reading her mind. "I wanted to ask your permission for something." This surprised her. She raised an eyebrow. "Permission for what?" "I'd like your permission to sit by your corral. he said simply. On your side of the fence. I won't set foot inside. I won't bring a rope or a saddle. I just want to sit with your stallion for a while. Serena was taken aback. Of all the things she had expected, this was not it. Why? Silas looked past her, toward the distant black shape of Tempête. That horse is grieving, ma'am. Same as you. People forget that animals feel a loss as deep as we do. Maybe deeper, 'cause they can't put words to it. All those men, they walk in there shouting, trying to fill the silence Jacques left behind. All they're doing is making it louder. Sometimes a fella just needs someone to share the silence with. The simple, profound truth of his words struck Serena like a physical blow. He wasn't talking about breaking a horse. He was talking about healing a wound. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of something other than defiance and exhaustion. It was a fragile, unfamiliar thing. Hope. The contest is on Saturday, she said, her voice softer now. But the corral is open. Silas nodded a small, grateful dip of his head. Thank you, ma'am. He put his hat back on turned dust devil and rode back to his own property without another word. Serena watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her chest. He hadn't asked for her hand, her land, or her fortune. He had asked for permission to be quiet. In a world full of noise, it was the most remarkable request she had ever heard. Bart Corrigan was a man for whom patience was a foreign concept. He'd allowed Serena's foolish contest to play out confident it would end in her ruin and desperation. He'd watched with satisfaction as man after man was humbled, his spies reporting every detail. The incident with his man Flint had been a setback, not because Flint was nearly killed, but because the sheer untamed violence of the Stallion had scared off any further serious contenders. The game, it seemed, was over. He saw Silas Kane's quiet vigil at the fence line and dismissed it. A broken-down dirt scratcher trying to sweet-talk a horse, it was laughable, a waste of time. Corrigan's time, however, was running out. Rumors were circulating that the territorial governor was considering a petition to declare the Redemption Valley aquifer a public utility, which would shatter Corrigan's ambition of controlling the valley's water. He needed the Dubois land, and he needed it now. On Friday, the day before the next scheduled and likely non-existent contest, Corrigan made his move. He didn't send a messenger. He rode to l'Étoile Solitaire himself, flanked by Flint and another hard-faced rider. They didn't stop at the gate, but rode straight up to the main house, their horses tearing up the yard Serena worked so hard to maintain. Serena met them on the porch, a Winchester rifle held loosely in her arms. Sam Pickett emerged from the barn, an old double-barreled shotgun cradled in his. "Corrigan," Serena said, her voice flat and cold. "You're trespassing. Neighborly visit, Serena." "Nothing more," Corrigan said, dismounting. He was a large man, dressed in a tailored suit that looked absurdly out of place on a dusty ranch. He oozed a false charm that did nothing to hide the menace in his eyes. "I've come with my final offer. The game is up. No one else is coming for your suicide ride. No one wants to marry a woman who'd let a horse kill them." "The terms of my proclamation stand," she retorted. Corrigan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your terms are a joke. Here are my terms. $20,000 cash. For the land, the herd, the brand. Everything. That's more than fair, and it's 10,000 more than I'll offer next week." The answer is still no. Corrigan's smile vanished. His face hardened into a mask of cruel intent. "I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a negotiation. I've already filed a claim with the land office challenging your water rights. I have witnesses," he gestured to Flint, who will testify that your fences are in disrepair and your herd is being mismanaged. They'll say you're incompetent, hysterical with grief. A judge who owes me a favor or two will be happy to appoint a conservator for this ranch, and that conservator will be me. It was a devastating, perfectly legal blow. He could tie her up in court for years, bleeding her dry of money and spirit until she had nothing left. The law, she knew, was a tool easily wielded by the rich and powerful. "This is my home," she whispered, her knuckles white on the stock of the Winchester. "It's a commodity," Corrigan corrected her, "and I'm buying. You have until noon tomorrow to ride into town and sign the papers. If you don't, I will unleash a world of legal misery on you that will make that black stallion of yours look like a pony." He mounted his horse, his point made. As he turned to leave, his eyes fell upon the corral. Silas Kane was there, sitting on the top rail of the fence. He hadn't moved a muscle during the entire confrontation. He was just watching his pale blue eyes fixed on Tempate, who was pacing restlessly inside. "Look at that," Corrigan sneered. "Your last suitor, the pauper of Redemption Valley. Perhaps he can pay me for the ranch with his good intentions." Flint spat on the ground. "He's been out there for 2 days, boss, just sittin'. Ain't right in the head, I reckon." Corrigan gave Silas a look of utter contempt before wheeling his horse around. "Noon tomorrow, Serena. The clock is ticking." He and his men rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and a suffocating silence in their wake. Serena felt the world shrinking around her. The Winchester suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She had fought so hard, but Corrigan had found a way around her defenses. He wasn't trying to break her horse, he was breaking the law to his will. Sam came to stand beside her. "We can fight him, Cat." "How, Sam?" she asked, her voice cracking for the first time. "With what he owns, the judge, the lawyers. He'll own the whole valley." Her gaze drifted to the corral. Silas Kane was still there. He hadn't looked at her or acknowledged the drama at the house. His entire focus remained on the grieving stallion. In that moment, watching him, Serena understood that Corrigan was wrong. Silas wasn't there for her or the ranch. He was there for the horse, and in his quiet, unassuming way, he was the only man who had shown up that week. The only man left. Her impossible proclamation had 1 day left to run, and its final unlikely contestant was a man who hadn't even entered the contest. For 2 days, Silas Kane did exactly what he said he would. He arrived shortly after dawn, untied a small canvas roll from his saddle, and took up a position on the ground, leaning his back against the thick posts of the corral fence. He never got too close, never made a sudden move. He simply sat. Inside the corral, Tempate was a storm of suspicion. He snorted, pawed the ground, and kept his distance, watching Silas with intelligent, wary eyes. He would pace the far fence, then whip his head around as if to catch Silas in some treacherous act. But Silas never did anything. He didn't talk to the horse in a cooing, patronizing voice like some had. He didn't offer treats. He didn't hold out a hand. He just shared the space, exuding a profound and unshakable calm. From the porch, Serena and Sam watched the silent dialogue unfold. It was the most peculiar thing they had ever witnessed. "He's either a fool or a saint," Sam muttered on the first afternoon. "Maybe you have to be a bit of both to understand an animal like that," Serena replied, her eyes never leaving the two figures. By the second day, something began to shift. Tempete's frantic pacing slowed. He still kept his distance, but his movements were less agitated. He would stop and graze on a few tufts of dry grass all the while, keeping one ear swiveled toward the silent man at the fence. The fury in his eyes was still there, but beneath it, a flicker of curiosity began to grow. He had thrown, bitten, and charged 24 men who had tried to impose their will on him. This one had no will to impose. He was a feature of the landscape, as patient and unassuming as the ancient rocks that dotted the hills. After Corrigan's threatening visit on Friday, the atmosphere at the ranch was thick with dread. Serena felt the weight of the noon deadline like a physical stone in her stomach. Yet she found herself drawn to the scene at the corral. It was an island of peace in her sea of troubles. Late that afternoon, she walked down to where Silas was sitting. He heard her approach and slowly got to his feet, dusting off his worn trousers. "Mr. Kane," she said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Ma'am?" He nodded. She gestured toward Tempate, who was watching them both from the center of the corral. "He seems calmer. He's just not used to someone listening," Silas said. "Everyone who comes here wants to talk to command. He's got a lot to say, but he does it with his ears, his tail, the way he holds his head. Most folks don't know the language." Serena looked at the man before her. He was thin, his clothes were frayed, and he likely didn't have 2 dimes to rub together. But he spoke with a wisdom that humbled her. "I heard what Corrigan said." She confessed, her voice low. "He's given me until noon tomorrow. He's going to take my ranch." Silas's calm blue eyes met hers. For a moment he looked not at the horse, but at her. He saw the fierce pride, the deep fear, and the crushing weight of her burden. "I know," he said simply. "That's why I'm here." The quiet implication hung in the air between them. He hadn't come to win a prize. He had seen a woman in trouble, and this was his way of offering help. Not with guns or fists, but with a quiet understanding that went to the very heart of the problem. "Saturday starts at dawn, Mr. Kane." Serena said, a resolve hardening in her voice. The contest wasn't over yet. "My proclamation stands until noon." "I know that too," he replied. He unrolled his small canvas bundle. Inside was a worn, leather-bound book, a canteen of water, and a piece of hardtack. He offered her the canteen. She took a small sip. The silence between them was no longer awkward or empty. It was a shared space, a respite from the storm. As the sun began to dip below the western hills, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, Silas finally spoke to the horse. His voice was quiet, not much more than a murmur. "He was a good man, wasn't he?" Silas said, his eyes on Tempête. "Your Jacques. He understood you. And you miss him. I know what it's like to lose your anchor. To feel like the whole world is a storm and you're just adrift." Tempêt's ears, which had been pinned back, flickered. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. He lowered his head, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air between himself and the man. He wasn't submitting. He was listening. Silas didn't move. He didn't reach out. He just let the horse come to him. "You don't have to carry it all alone, friend," Silas murmured. As darkness fell, Tempête stood a mere 10 feet from Silas, his head down, his posture relaxed for the first time in months. He was no longer a demon. He was just a horse, missing his master. Silas finally stood up, rolled his canvas, and tipped his hat to Serena. "See you at dawn, Ma'am." As he walked away, Serena knew with a certainty that defied all logic that tomorrow would be unlike any other Saturday. The fate of her ranch, her future, and her heart would not be decided in a courtroom or by a bully's threats, but right here, in this dusty circle of wood and earth. The dawn broke on Saturday with a cold, clear light. The air was still heavy with anticipation. There was no crowd of hopefuls, no jeering onlookers. There was only Serena on the porch, Sam Pickett beside her, and Bart Corrigan, with Flint watching from their usual ridge. Confident they were about to witness the final pathetic failure before their victory at noon. Silas Kane arrived not on his mare, but on foot, carrying nothing but a simple, well-worn saddle blanket and a soft leather bridle without a bit. He didn't swagger or boast. He walked to the corral gate, gave a brief, respectful nod to Serena, and slipped inside, closing it gently behind him. Tempête was waiting. The horse stood in the center of the corral, alert and powerful. The wildness was still in his eyes, but the blind panic was gone. He watched Silas approach with an intense, questioning gaze. Silas didn't walk directly at him. He walked the perimeter of the corral, his steps slow, and measured his eyes soft. He spoke in that same low murmur from the night before, not a string of commands, but a conversation. He spoke of the morning chill of the hawk circling overhead, of the memory of a good horse he once knew. He wasn't trying to trick or dominate the animal. He was making himself a part of Tempêt's world, a known and trusted presence. After a few minutes he stopped and laid the saddle blanket on the top rail of the fence. He let Tempête see it, smell it. Then he approached not from the front, but from the side, letting the horse see him every step of the way. He held out a hand, not to touch, but to offer. Tempête snorted, took a step back, then held his ground. He stretched out his powerful neck and sniffed Silas's hand. He smelled not the fear, greed, or cruelty of the others, but the scent of honest labor of horses and of a profound, abiding calm. Slowly, gently, Silas raised his hand and rested it on the stallion's neck. Tempête flinched but didn't bolt. Silas stroked his neck, his touch light and sure, finding the tense, knotted muscles and working them gently. He murmured to the horse, his voice a soothing vibration. Then came the blanket. He didn't throw it. He folded it, let the horse nuzzle it, and then, with one fluid, practiced motion, he slid it onto Tempêt's broad back. The stallion shuddered, his skin twitching, but he stood. Next came the bridle. Silas worked with an unhurried grace, slipping the leather over the horse's head, his movements communicating respect, not conquest. On the ridge, Corrigan scoffed. "Look at him, the horse whisperer. This is taking forever. Just get on the damn thing and get thrown so I can go collect my property." But Serena watched, her heart in her throat. This wasn't a contest anymore. It was something sacred. This was a man earning trust, not demanding submission. Finally, the moment came. Silas put his hand on Tempêt's back, his foot in the imaginary stirrup of the blanket. He paused, looking into the horse's intelligent eye. "Just a ride, friend," he whispered, "to watch the sun come up." He swung himself up onto the stallion's back. For a heartbeat, Tempête froze, his entire body coiled like a steel spring. Serena held her breath. This was the moment every other man had been met with an explosion of violent rejection. But the explosion never came. Tempête took a deep, shuddering breath. He shifted his weight, feeling the man on his back. Silas sat easily, his body balanced and relaxed, moving with the horse, not against it. He didn't grab, pull, or kick. He just sat. One heartbeat. 2. 3. Tempête took a single tentative step. Then another. He began to walk the edge of the corral, his gait unsure at first, then smoothing into the powerful fluid rhythm that was his birthright. 4. 5. 6. On the ridge, Corrigan's jaw dropped. Flint looked on in disbelief. 7. 8. 9. A smile, the first genuine smile in months, blossomed on Serena's face. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the beautiful image of the man and the horse moving as one in the golden morning light. 10. Silas had done it. He hadn't broken the horse, he had healed him. But Corrigan was not a man to accept defeat. A snarl twisted his face. "No, I will not be beaten by a vagrant." He pulled a pistol from his coat. "If the horse won't throw him, I'll make it." He aimed not at Silas, but at the ground near Tempêt's feet, and fired. Crack. The gunshot shattered the morning's peace. The bullet kicked up a spray of dirt right in front of the stallion. Any other horse, any other rider, and it would have been a catastrophe. Tempate screamed and reared his front hooves, slashing at the air. But Silas didn't panic. He moved with the horse, his calm a silent anchor in the sudden chaos. He leaned forward, his voice in the stallion's ear, a steady reassurance against the ringing shot. The bond forged over 2 days of patient silence held firm. Tempate came down on all fours, trembling, but under control, his trust in the man on his back overriding his terror. Serena, seeing Corrigan raise his pistol again, didn't hesitate. The Winchester was in her hands. She fired a single shot, not at Corrigan, but into the air. It was a warning, sharp and clear. "That's enough, Corrigan. Whoa!" She yelled, her voice ringing with renewed strength. "Sheriff Brody may be in your pocket, but he won't be able to ignore a murder in plain sight of witnesses." Corrigan hesitated, looking from the determined woman with the rifle to the man who now had the wild stallion under perfect control. He saw the admiration in Sam's eyes. He saw the game was lost. His treachery had been exposed. His bluff had been called. With a curse that fouled the clean morning air, Corrigan shoved his pistol away, yanked on his reins, and galloped away, his henchmen scrambling to follow. He had been beaten not by force, but by a quiet man's character. In the corral, Silas slid off Tempate's back and stroked the horse's trembling neck. He had won the contest. He had won the ranch. He had won the widow's hand. But as he turned to look at Serena, her face shining with gratitude and awe, he knew he had earned something far more valuable. He had earned her respect. The dust from Bart Corrigan's ignominious retreat settled slowly, particle by particle, returning to the earth, and leaving a profound ringing silence in its wake. The sharp scent of gunpowder hung in the cool morning air, a stark reminder of the violence that had almost shattered the fragile peace. For a long moment, no one moved. Serena stood on her porch, the heavy Winchester, still warm in her hands, her knuckles white. Sam Pickett remained by the barn, his old shotgun held at a loose, ready, his gaze fixed on the empty ridge where the threat had been. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Inside the corral, the silence was broken by a soft, shuddering sigh from Tempate. The great stallion, whose terror and fury had been the crucible of this entire ordeal, lowered his head and nudged his wet nose into Silas Kane's chest. The gesture was one of complete and utter surrender, not of spirit, but of fear. It was the trust of a creature who had found his anchor in the storm. Silas stroked the horse's powerful neck, his own hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the last few minutes. He murmured something too low for the others to hear, a quiet promise between man and beast. Slowly, Sam Pickett lowered the hammer on his shotgun and walked toward the corral, his weathered face a mask of disbelief and profound respect. He stopped at the fence, looking at Silas not as a stranger, but as a marvel of nature. "In all my years," Sam said, his voice raspy with emotion, "all my years with Jacques, God rest his soul, I never thought I'd see another man with that kind of understanding. Jacques, he earned that horse's soul with love from the day he was a foal. You son, you earned it with silence and respect in 2 days. I don't know which is the greater miracle." Silas offered a small, tired nod of acknowledgement, too modest to accept the weight of the compliment. He unfastened the bitless bridle from Tempate's head, leaving the horse unencumbered. He then opened the corral gate, and instead of bolting for freedom, as he would have done with any other man, Tempate simply followed Silas out, walking at his shoulder like a loyal dog. It was then that Serena finally moved. Her legs felt unsteady as she descended the porch steps, the wooden planks groaning under her boots. She walked across the yard, her eyes fixed on the man and the horse. The entire dynamic of her world had been upended. For weeks, this yard had been a stage for masculine pride, for contests of will and brute force. Now it was a place of quiet victory, won by the very absence of those things. She stopped a few feet from Silas. The noon deadline, Corrigan's terrible ultimatum, had officially passed, marked only by the sun's high position in the vast Montana sky. The threat was gone. The ranch was safe. And it was all because of this quiet, unassuming man who owned the patch of failing land next door. The weight of her proclamation, a document born of desperation, now settled between them, with the gravity of a signed and sealed contract. "You did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried clearly in the stillness. "The proclamation. You met all the terms." Silas finally looked up from the horse, his pale blue eyes meeting hers. In their depths, she saw not the triumph of a victor, but the weariness of a man who shunned conflict and had been forced into its heart. He seemed uncomfortable with her gaze, with the implication of his success. He looked down at his worn boots, scuffing one in the dust. "I didn't do it for the ranch, Serena." He said his use of her first name, feeling both strange and perfectly natural. "Or for the other part of the bargain." His voice was low, laced with an earnestness that was impossible to doubt. "I know," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "That's why you succeeded. Everyone else came here to take something. You came here to give. You gave him your patience. You gave him your peace." An understanding flowed between them, a current of shared knowledge that went far deeper than words. They were both survivors of profound loss people who understood the language of grief. They stood there for a long moment, the unsaid promise of marriage hanging in the air, a consequence neither had truly anticipated. Serena took a deep breath, the scent of dust and sage filling her lungs. "A proclamation is a powerful thing, Silas. I wrote it to be a shield. I never truly thought about what would happen if someone lowered it." She paused, choosing her next words with the utmost care. "But a partnership, a true partnership, the kind that lasts a lifetime. It must be built, not won in a contest." Silas looked up, and a wave of relief washed over his features. He had clearly been wrestling with the same thought. "I agree," he said, the tension leaving his shoulders. "That's why I think we should start with a different kind of partnership." He gestured vaguely to the west, towards his own land. "My 160 acres are rock and prayer. The ground is tough, and the water is scarce. But it's mine, and I work it honestly. Your land," he said, his gaze sweeping over the lush valley of l'Étoile Solitaire, "has the water and the rich grass. It has the heart of the valley. But it's too much for one person to protect, especially with vultures like Corrigan circling." He looked back at her, his proposition clear and practical. "Let's be partners, not just in name, but in deed. We combine them. Your water, my sweat. Your herds, my labor. We can register a new brand, the SKC, perhaps. We'll build something together, something strong enough that will make Corrigan curse our names every time he has to ride around our fence line for the next 20 years. It was the most romantic, most sensible proposal she had ever heard. It was an offer not of ownership, but of mutual endeavor. It was an offer of respect for her skill as a rancher, not just her status as a widow. A slow smile spread across her face. "And the other part of the bargain?" Serena asked, a playful challenge entering her tone. "The part about my hand in marriage." Silas met her gaze directly now, and all the shyness was gone, replaced by a profound sincerity that struck her to the core. "Serena," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "A marriage is a sacred promise. It's built on knowing someone's heart, on shared sunrises and silent understanding. It's not something to be claimed as a prize for a 10-second horse ride." He looked away for a second, a shadow of an old pain crossing his face. "The only marriage I ever knew was built that way. I would not dishonor that memory or dishonor you by starting another on any lesser foundation." He was giving her a choice. In a world where men had tried to conquer her horse, her land, and her will, this man was offering her the one thing she hadn't realized she'd lost: the freedom to choose her own future. He wasn't claiming his prize. He was handing her back her own life. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked at the corners of her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming relief and a blossoming, unfamiliar joy. "I think," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "that sounds like the truest thing I've heard in a very long time, Silas Kane." And so, a new dawn truly began on the ranch that was no longer just the Lone Star. It didn't start with the ringing of church bells, but with the solid, rhythmic thud of a post driver as Silas began mending the northern fence line that Corrigan's men had cut. Serena was there with him, not watching from the porch, but sighting the posts, her practical eye, ensuring the line was straight and true. They worked together, their movements falling into an easy, unspoken rhythm. That evening they shared a meal at the large oak table in her ranch house, the same table where she had eaten 1,000 lonely meals since Jacques' passing. Sam Pickett joined them, and his presence eased the initial awkwardness, his familiar stories filling the spaces between their careful conversation. But as the night wore on, Serena found herself watching Silas, noticing the way he listened more than he spoke, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the gentle way he thanked her for the meal. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt hopeful. Days turned into a week. They rode the boundaries of their combined lands, together, planning, dreaming, working. They were partners in every sense of the word. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, in strokes of violet and gold, they sat on their horses atop a high ridge, looking down at the valley they now protected together. Silas was mounted on Tempate, the stallion calm and majestic beneath him, a living symbol of their unlikely union. "It was a good week's work, partner." Serena said the word partner, feeling more right than any other. Silas looked over at her, his face softened by the twilight. A genuine, easy smile touched his lips. "That it was partner," he replied. The future between them remained an unwritten page, but for the first time, Serena knew she would not be writing it alone. The story ahead would not be one of a widow and a lonely rancher, but of two resilient souls, a man and a woman who had found in the heart of the wild, untamed West. Not a prize to be won, but a partnership to be built one sunrise at a time. And that's the tale of Serena Dubois Silas Kane and the great Stallion Tempate. It's a story that reminds us that in the heart of the Wild West, true strength wasn't always measured by the speed of your draw or the size of your herd. Sometimes it was measured by patience, by empathy, and by the courage to heal a wound instead of breaking a spirit. Silas Kane proved he was a real cowboy, not by conquering the wild beast, but by understanding its heart. And in doing so, he won the heart of a woman who was just as wild and just as strong. He didn't just win a ranch. He and Serena built a future, proving that the strongest foundations are laid with quiet respect and shared silence. If this story of the untamed West and the quiet strength it took to survive here captured your imagination, make sure to hit that like button. Share it with a friend, who loves a good old-fashioned tale of grit and heart. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We've got a whole frontier of stories just like this one waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for listening, partners.